Hi there, I'm Allison Green at Albuquerque Academy. I'm one of the visual arts teachers. I teach drawing and painting. I teach AP drawing and foundation in art. I'm also a professional artist. I have a studio in town and I show my work. So I've been here for 19 years and we have a great art program at Academy. We offer a lot of different classes. After 6th and 7th grade art, you can take foundation in art. You'll learn all sorts of skills in that class. We believe that art is teachable. You don't have to be just talented from birth. We can teach you all sorts of things. And after foundation in art, that's the prerequisite class. You can take photo digital and learn how to take great photographs and use the computer for digital art. You can do sculpture and use all sorts of different types of materials. You can take ceramics and learn how to work with clay. You can do video art and printmaking, and in the advanced levels we have art history, AP art history as well. So there's lots of different options in our art program. I'm going to show you a few techniques today in terms of painting and drawing, just to get you started. If you're at home and you don't have a lot of art supplies, there's all sorts of things you can do with things that you already have at home. So let's see, the first thing that we're going to work with is line. That's the basic thing to think about. So we're going to start with contour drawing. And you can use just a simple Sharpie that you have at home. You can just use a regular pencil too, if that's all you have. But if you have any other kinds of pens, black ink pens, they work. Today I'm going to use India ink and a pen with a nib. These nibs come in all different sizes. They're removable. Like this is the holder, this is the little nib. And these are really fun to draw with. So in my art, I like to get outside into nature and I like to draw and paint plants and botanicals. So I went outside and I gathered a few plants here just that are super common. So you could go into your backyard or a park or open space and just gather a couple of things that you want to look at and draw. So I went out to the garden outside and I picked this. It's called a desert bird of paradise. And I just picked one of the blooms because I think those are cool. I picked a bloom from a desert willow tree, and they kind of hang down like this. And so I'm going to show you how to kind of look at these. I just gathered a couple things. This is a cactus from an agave cactus, these cool pods that you can get into detail with line and draw these things. There's other things too, but that's what we'll focus on. So with line, contour drawing is it's a different thing than outlines. It's a different thing than the way that a lot of people are used to sketching. A lot of people take a pencil and they just start doing like a little sketchy sketch line like that. Contour drawing is quite different. What you do is it's a really continuous flowing line that has a beautiful line quality to it. And so you can use your Sharpie, you can use your ink, you dip it in here. If you have this, it's fun to do. And you begin to observe closely what you're looking at. That's the main thing about drawing is don't draw what you think you know, draw what you see. Trust your eyes. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I can't really talk while I do this because I'm focused so much in drawing that I'm using the right side of my brain to really observe closely and slowly. And so I'm going to start at the bottom edge. I've got this little square here, and I'm just going to start, and I'm holding the pen. If you hold your Sharpie, hold it in kind of a loose way, and just begin at one of the edges and work your way up. When you have to load the ink, you just load it and you go back to where you were. You're trying to have your eye look on the piece at the same pace that your pen is on the paper. You don't want to get ahead. So you want to start looking and following the contour of this crazy complicated thing. The more complicated your subject, the better. Because you want to backtrack. You're using this flowy line to really try to make a descriptive. I'm going to come up the other side. And there's some proportional things that happen. It maybe doesn't look as realistic as what you're used to, but contour drawing is about observing. I'm gonna come back up here. And I'm going to stop now, but you could go on for a long time drawing this. I'm going to show you something that's really fun to do. If you have a spray bottle or a sponge with some water, wet the paper. And it doesn't have to be drenched. I kind of over wet that, but it doesn't matter. And then do your ink. You can use you could use a stick. This is a bamboo stick that you can dip in the ink and see what happens when you go in the wet paper. It's really crazy. Oops. That's awesome. Like, you get to look at what happens with the marks. You can have a different thickness. You can take your old, like, Crayola markers, the kind that are water soluble. So these are permanent, but if you have any Crayola markers, those are great because they will go and they'll blend in the water. So let me come back with this pen. And you can create lots of different effects by letting the water do something with the ink. So that's a really fun way to sort of have less control than what you're used to with a pencil. And you can play with that. You can come back, you can let it dry, you can do a little blotting like with a paper towel if it's too wet. And you can just really experiment and see what happens when you play with the ink. It's fun. So, art is fun. Okay, so that's ink. You can also use pencils, of course, but I have water-soluble pencils, and they're really fun. You draw just like you would with colored pencils. So I'm just gonna mess around here and try a few different, just kind of marks for you to see. So you can use it just as a colored pencil. This one happens to be black, this one's blue. And you can even do a big mass of shading if you wanted to build up some values. This looks scribbly right now, but watch what I do. So when you take your brush, any kind of paint brush will work, anything you have. Watercolor brushes are round and pointy. They have a nice point on them. And there's all different sizes, but you can use any brush that you have at home. But when you go over top of this colored pencil, the water-soluble ones, you get this great wash. And you can play with that. And so you'll still see the marks through there, but it is really a fun thing to turn some of the marks into a wash and have some be the lines. And so, it's a really interesting, wonderful way of working with both line and wash. So water-soluble colored pencils. We have watercolors. And you know, these are pretty inexpensive watercolor set, and you can do so much with watercolor. They have tubes of watercolor that we can squeeze out into a palette like this. And there's lots of different types of watercolors, but any watercolors are great. They make these little palettes where you put your water in here. So you grab your brush, and having a big brush is kind of handy. A lot of people just use tiny little watercolor brushes, and they're great too for detail, but it's really nice when you need to cover a large area to have a pretty big brush. So you put in water into your palette, or you could put it into your trays here, and you just, you need little puddles of water first. Get those happening. And then you can grab your color and start putting it, I'm gonna set that down. And that's just pure red. So we've got the primaries of red, yellow, and blue. And you can make every color with red, yellow, and blue, obviously. Those are the primaries, you mix them. Let's see what happens when I add a little of this yellow. It'll make a much more interesting type of orange than this orange, okay? And you can get all different variations. So I could have a reddish orange, more of a middle orange, and more of a yellow orange. Same with the greens. I mix the yellow and the blue to get interesting greens. And so when you start with your color and you mix your colors, get a little tester sheet. And then you'll be able, before you start laying it down, you can test, oh, that one, I don't like that quite as much. I want to add more yellow to it. So having a little tester sheet's super handy. And then I'm kind of liking that kind of yellow, that orange a little bit more. So what I do with watercolor is I do a light drawing first with a pencil. And so, you know, I just grabbed this. This is one of these little pod things. And I did a very simple line drawing here with a pencil that's really light, so that then when you come in with your watercolor, you will be able to, and I'm not even going for green. I'm going to make this thing orange because I'm going to interpret it. So you can, having this point, if you hold your brush sort of upright, you can get a really cool effect by two different techniques. One is the wet paint on dry paper, okay? And you can make it go thicker over time and stronger color, and then wet into wet. You also might need to have some Kleenex or something for blotting, because that's handy to have. And you don't rub, you just dip that little edge in there and you'll be able to blot upward if you go too heavy with your color. So the thing about watercolor is you want to maintain some of the weight of the paper if you can. So I'm just going to do a couple things right here, and like you can follow your little pencil marks, and that's cool. It's basically wet on dry. But what you can do, and it's really fun to do this, is to do wet into wet. So for the background, you just take plain, clean water. Should have rinsed this jar out, but it's fine. And you wet the paper first. And then you can lay in on wet paint. I'm going to mix up a kind of a purpley green here. Because I don't like using colors straight out of I like mixing everything. It's more interesting. Colors are better when they're mixed. So this is sort of a lavender color, and then you do wet paint onto the wet paper, and it's a softer sort of bleed that you can get. And you can build that up layer upon layer to get a much more, let me take some of this heavier, and it sort of can bleed. You can lift your paper and let it bleed down. So the beautiful thing about watercolor is it's wet. So let it be painterly and wet-ish, and doesn't have to be super controlled. Those are just a couple of different techniques using watercolor. You could come back in after this dries. You can come back in with your pen and draw over your water. Once it's dry, you can come back and like put line over top of that watercolor. You get a really cool thing happening between the wash and the line. Right here I have a couple of examples of doing, just sort of using both, using the white of the paper, the watercolor, and then markers to build up, having line and wash at the same time. What I want you guys to do is play, make marks, play, be experimental. It's all, art is about experimenting with materials, and I really look forward to seeing some of you if you come to Academy.